All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new case study. I know it's been like a week and a half-ish since my last one. I was just so busy last week. I did not have the time, but yeah, I'm thinking about making this one public as well, but I do kind of want to go through what we talked about on Friday and kind of get some decent biases for the week, see what's up and if there's anything that potentially catches the eye, right? So in case you didn't watch Friday's webinar, go ahead and watch it. We can pretty much follow up directly from what we talked about on Friday, which was the opportunity or the possibility to see this internal sweep cause a move to the downside, which would still support the move to the downside. And the reason why I was holding my positions around break even was because although this can be a reason for the bearishes to fail and continue a bullish bias or create a bullish bias, there's also the chance that this newly created bullish bias could also fail and then eventually give us the original target, because the overall consensus was that we were still looking for the continuation or the completion of A, B, C, D. And that's actually what we got. So I got my initial TP here. Um, there's a gap. What do I think about gaps? I mean, price is going to go there regardless. I don't really have a reason. Do they need to fill? Not necessarily. I just don't see the reason why that could potentially happen, or why that's potentially the case, why they have to close, right? Because we play a game of probabilities, and try to maneuver through possibilities to try to capitalize on them, right? So coming into Sunday, sorry, um, I did trade London session and I did find a second potential entry to the downside. And that position was based on the buy to sell that technically led to this break of structure, which led to the sweep of that previous low, which was my initial partial. And I was pretty much anticipating for this to be a completion into the full target, which would be the completion of the leg that we just talked about, right? And I did note that we had high momentum coming here, right? A very big move to the upside, but the fact that that came back to be tested and there's internal disruption, then to me, I kind of liked how this pattern is moving. So you guys know that the only real candlestick patterns, quote unquote, that I like are like 3-pin patterns and different types of engulfings. So whenever I have this engulfing here, and it's also a 3-pin pattern that's also stacked above a internal structural disruption, which is pretty much low, high, retracement, solidification, break, then I'm kind of voiding out the fact that we still haven't broken the internal structure. And because of that, I took a semi-high risk position here with obviously a my invalidation at the high, Y at the high, because if we are to react and we are to then break through this, then realistically that would be order flow disruption, which would be the catalyst as to why we would go higher. And we actually got a decent move. We actually broke, I believe, one of these two levels of structure, and that's where I actually took a partial break even, and then that ended up breaking even here, and then my overall ended up getting broken even there. So to follow up on what we talked about on Friday, the justification to hold was correct. The partial was achieved. Um, yes, I could have easily moved my trail stop here, but the difference is almost nothing. So the fact that I took my partial outweighs that minuscule amount of price. But the second entry was actually very good because of the timing of the entry. The timing of the entry came from the engulfing slash 3-pin pattern that was based on the internal SD on low, high retracement. That failed. So then that gives us the perimeter, right? And then we have the extra reaction to support that perimeter. And that ended up, like I said, giving me an initial partial here and then went break even, and that ended up both failing, right? So could I have anticipated this to happen? Based on an intraday stance, no, I cannot anticipate this move to happen. But because this move does happen, then that is a failure of a continuation to the downside. because obviously if we're still looking at this to go lower, right, this break solidifies the high, which is the reason for my partial, and that's why I moved my stop loss to a bit above break even as well. Therefore, the failure, that is a scenario to go higher, and then that would be a catalyst to potentially find a position to go higher, and then that was present here. I don't know if anybody was able to catch that, but once we have the failure, then we have the LGC. Then there's a very clear sell to buy perimeter with an initial TP being at previous highs. And then that would have been the essential transition of the entire trend, right? Which would be this. Essentially, this failure is the catalyst that's causing us to have unwillingness towards the downside. That is then leading us to the higher move. So unfortunately, I missed that. Whatever. But I was able to secure my partials, so I was correct, even though I was wrong. And which at the end of the day is really kind of what matters. And outside of that, the only other pair that I'm kind of like eyeing at the moment is like UCAD. And we discussed this a bit as well on Friday. Pretty much on every single scale, we are bearish, right? This is the weekly sweep, internal swing, bearish structure, and then that came into POI, then that created a new leg, and then we had the sweep last week, I believe, which is now currently in play. So because that sweep is currently in play, then therefore, if we sweat this high and we are in bearish structure and we've already transitioned internally, then it makes sense to want to come lower. But now it's just a matter of getting the timing in order to want to go, or in order to want to execute based on that bias, right? So I'm hoping we get like a bit deeper pricing. I don't know if we see maybe some type of strong reaction from oil toward the downside, because it looks like that could potentially happen. Why could that potentially happen? Because look at where we're reacting from on a weekly basis. Oops, I meant 3-day basis. Bearish POI reaction there. Is that tradable? Not really to me. I don't really want to pick highs, but it's the reaction that matters. And the reaction here is showing me that the initial push, actually, let me a bit of depth for you guys there. So technically the solidified low is here because that's the last time we broke structure. We didn't really break a low in this whole run to the upside. So technically we're kind of pulling back, but the what's kind of catching my eye towards the downside is the fact that we have this internal reaction here. Why? Because if we're then to judge low into high based on the momentum, pull back low, solidification, that breaking there. Why is that low important? I mean, I'm just assuming that low based on the creation of that final move to the upside. So once that final move to the upside, right, is broken, disruption, then internally we are bearish, right? So even if this is to pop back up, it would support the overall, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bullish because there's a disruption here. Then therefore, this could potentially be a POI. So therefore, we can probably come up here, and then if we have a failure, then awesome. This would then cause UCAD to go up, and that would pretty much support the bias. I'm not saying that they're 100% correlated, but it could be a reason as to why this pops up higher, and it would give me a potential scenario to the downside. And as you guys can see, buy to sell, I could even see this reasonably only coming back into the previous low. Why? Because there is a final push to the upside, which is what invalidated my trade from last week. That ended up leading us to the downside. So this is an overall general buy to sell zone. And we may not even reach this high, right? And that would suck, right? But I would hope we get a bit deeper pricing at a decent time, get a decent transition. But this is a potential swing setup. So it is going to take time for this to potentially bloom. I think that's the easiest way for me to put it. So now let's go ahead and look at dollar. Ooh, this is looking crazy. All right, let's go ahead and take this out. So if you guys have been following the case studies too, we kind of talked about how this push to the upside is kind of the reason why I'm now full on bullish as of now, because you guys know that we've been pushing for that overall accumulation to be in play. Therefore, it would be low into high accumulation. Yes, we did sweep, so technically the internal swing is bearish. but the overall position is still bullish. So even though the swing is bearish, I don't necessarily swing my positions. So if I'm trading this from the internal, then if we have, right, a major intraday or swing sweep, and we have the internal transitions, then I can justify this to go higher, which is in support of the accumulation schematic that we've been talking about for a while. And that would be here. This is what we've been kind of eyeing for like since January-ish. So the fact that this is currently in play, we are technically here. So if this is to continue to play out, then it would support EU to be going to the downside. It would counteract the USDCAD bearish narrative, but I don't want to assume that. I want to wait for that price action to show me something because we have been bearish for a while. But if we're looking at this now from a bias POV, then right now I am anticipating, right, because of this big push to the upside that broke the internal structure, then I am anticipating. I'm actually going to delete this, wrong one, this. So I'm anticipating, hopefully, to see this give me a move to the upside. Why maybe another pull back down? Because we technically did react. We did break a pullback. So therefore, this is internally bearish. So if I want this to convert to be bullish, then the internal has to transition and hopefully fail, which would then give me the narrative to the upside, which would then be my target here. So yeah, internally from a scalp, this is technically bearish, but from the intraday stance, because we technically had a pullback be fully broken through, we have structural disruption. So therefore, I'm anticipating ABC, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Next one, EU. This one as well. I would really like to see this kind of go lower, especially after today's reaction, which would kind of favor that bullish narrative. That would be pretty cool for dollar. Why? Because technically we have swept this high. We have already had high momentum come into play. And because we had high momentum come into play, then I'm kind of anticipating this to at least sweep here. Here, more than likely, this is kind of like my actual desired target, because then that could solidify everything from the overall general sense and then potentially have a pullback to go to the upside. But this is a prediction. I don't really care to think this far ahead. All I care right now is that we have broken internal structure, which is the final low into the high based on a daily. We've swept the major high and we have high momentum here. Therefore, I am technically bearish from an intraday sense. And because I am bearish from the intraday sense, from a major intraday sense, to be more specific, then I have a sweep. That sweep is then followed by a dual sweep internal transition. So I'm hoping this could then provide an opportunity to the downside. And that would be high probability if we have a transition here, right? Why? Because this is where the buy to sell is. So that would be cool. And if we have like a failure here, right, then I'm kind of aiming for either back into premium buy to sell, or more than likely, I'm just going to probably sit out because I don't want to kind of counter or fight this, right? Because if we're looking at this from a trend POV, right, the low was broken based on this move. Therefore, this break of structure can be argued to be the solidification of the range, right? Why? Because it's the first time that a high that broke a low was taken. High that takes a low internally, high that takes a low internally, externally as well. But then here, high that takes out a low internally. That's the first time that's the first time it's been broken. So therefore, I can anticipate for this to be a range because we broke here. And if I'm to support that bias, then like I said, I would need a transition here from a scalp. So see this as like a level 3, level 4. See this as a internal bullish level 2, which has to counteract in order to give us the pullback of the range. And by counteract, I mean it has to be the opposite. right? You need bearish price action on a bullish pullback and vice versa. And so therefore, I would like to see that transition. That would be cool. Maybe you can get it during London. And yeah, other than that, I think the only other one I was kind of eyeing was UJ. This one's also really messy. Let me go ahead and delete a bunch of stuff. And by the way, guys, I haven't even looked at charts. This is like my raw charting session. So came back into a premium. That premium is there. If I want to refine that, that is potentially there. Maybe even here if I really wanted to refine. But the issue is that the POI has been confirmed. POI has been confirmed. So therefore, I can be bearish if the internal bullishness fails. And I'm not really counting on that because to sell here would be to assume that this is where the trend is going to shift rather than letting the trend shift or at least have some type of failure here, right? To then be the catalyst to consider this to be unwillingness, low, high, retracement, unwillingness, break, and then that would be a trend shift, right? So the opportunity is technically there right now, especially because I like to trade UJ during the session. We can see very clearly here there's a potential POI, but this would be technically counter trend because this is a CBOS from the internal bullish pull or bullish range, which is technically from an intraday stance, this is technically very bullish, right? So to take this potential POI, to take a position here, I would more than likely need to see this react, fail, break, give me some momentum, and then hopefully another transition. But more than likely, if we have momentum, then I can then justify going lower. All right, that would be the only scenario because up until right now, what we have right now, this is still technically bullish, right? So yeah, no clear sign on that one. And then last one, Bitcoin. This is something me and my friend are currently discussing, and it's pretty interesting as of right now because there's a conflicting bias. What are the conflicting biases? We are in a sell to buy very clearly here. You guys can see this is the sell to buy zone. The sell to buy zone technically has a internal reaction, but I don't think it's valid enough yet based on that weekly time frame. Because if I'm looking at the weekly time frame as this being a sell to buy, then technically the reaction that confirms the POI is like here. Unless we break lower and then this high isn't broken, then that would be validating a bullish bias. So technically the internal is still technically very bearish because we broke this and we have big bearish candles, right? So I am like technically still bearish, especially from the swing intraday, how we're looking at this now, right? Why? Because out of this entire range, this is the first time we're seeing any type of solidified high break. And because that solidified high broke, we then had an internal bearish break. So therefore, I'm still technically bearish. So therefore, based on what we're also reacting from right now, which is like an H1 buy to sell, that reacted there. So I would really just prefer to see something like that. That just makes a whole lot more sense. And he's telling me that because we had technically disruption here, then I should justify this as a CBOS continuation, which makes sense. It's technically valid. It's just I don't want to fight that, you know, and I don't want to assume that this is the beginning of the trend. So what would make me bullish? It would be hopefully the sweep of any of these lows internally and then have the POI break, because then that means that the continuation to the downside has failed, which means this is now valid and in play, and the internal timing could also show me an opportunity, which would make me bullish. Right. So I'm bearish, but that doesn't mean I'm going to sell. And I can't be bullish unless I have the catalyst. Right. So technically I'm bearish, but that doesn't mean I execute on the bias unless I see an opportunity. But either way, I don't really trade this stuff. I just find it cool to follow. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'm probably gonna make this one public. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about the biases. Let's see how these play out, and I'll see you guys on Friday.